the EMEA edition, though we appreciate anyone around the world can be watching at any point in time. Welcome back to Cranfield University. Welcome back to the Grenfell Turner Studios. And thanks to our hosts and our team here, Chris, Toby, and everybody behind the scenes who makes this feel possible. We were just chatting a minute ago. If you look back at this, I'm joined by Adam Gray.
Thank you. My first time in the studio, as it happens.
First time. The comment was that obviously you put on a few pounds on camera. The question is how many cameras does Chris have on me right now?
More than I want. Looking at dear.
We've got a really interesting show for you today. We're going to talk about neurodiversity, and we have a fascinating guest who I've known for a few years, Dr. Rebecca Jackson. But we're also joined by Alex Abbott.
Hi, Alex. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Looking forward to this show.
Good morning to you, Becky. How are you?
Having me on, and I hope you're all well as well.
So, not throwing you a deep end about this, but I know that you've not been in the country recently. You've been somewhere else. Do you want to tell us where you were?
Yeah, I recently trekked to Everest Base Camp for my sins. So yeah, I've not long got back from Nepal, actually. Yeah.
Oh, and what was that like?
Oh, that was amazing. It really is like being on another planet. It looks like the moon up there. It's out of this world. It was hard, but I'm so glad I did it.
It's interesting. So it's something that I've always wanted to do, trek to Everest Base Camp. But I guess that from what you've just said, base camp isn't in fact base, is it? It's not like you rock up in a tour bus and you're there. So how hard a place is it to get to?
So we trekked for 8 days to get there over some quite difficult terrain. I may have scooted on my bottom across a rock fall and had to avoid various obstacles like that. So yeah, it's not easy, but it is doable. And if I can get up there, then anybody can get up there with a little bit of training and preparation. So it is doable.
Wow. And what motivated you to do it? Because I'm going to be honest, I've always wanted to do that, but I always chicken out at the last minute. What made you do it?
Well, there were two things really. One is that I desperately wanted to see Mount Everest with my own eyes and look at the ice fall and have that experience. But the other thing is as well, because I'm a coach and I help people, neurodivergent people, to do hard things or to achieve complex goals. I wanted to be able to show that I could do that as a neurodivergent person and share how I went about doing that. So that was also a big driver for me, Andy.
I mean, hat off. I mean, I really admire that. And what we don't want to do in this conversation we were talking about is dive straight into a conversation about neurodiversity and have everyone go, can you help me understand?
Yeah, that was a really interesting thing that you said about the first question that we should ask you should be, can you explain what neurodiversity is? Because everybody has an idea of it. But it may be that we're not exactly on the same song sheet with this. So that was a fantastic point that you made, Andy. So can you lay out actually what is neurodiversity so that laymen and women like us can really understand it?
Yeah, no problem. So I think when it comes to neurodiversity, then that refers to the whole range of brains that exist within humanity. And when we're talking about neurodivergence, the way that individual people might differ from like the most common type of brain, we might see that people who are neurodivergent have different ways of learning or communicating or experiencing and interacting with the world. And that will be down to maybe how their brain is wired or structured or the way it works. But yeah, that's what neurodiversity is, the range of brains. And then neurodivergence is the way that an individual person's brain is and might differ from the most kind of common type of brain and way of interacting with the world. I hope that helps.
Very much so.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
much so.
So obviously we're SalesTV, so we're going to put a bit of a lens on this around sales, if that's okay. So how do you think neurodiversity affects a salesperson? I'm dyslexic. I'll lay that out there. I always have been. When I was at school 10 to 45 years ago, I don't think anyone really recognised dyslexia. In some countries, I know a great colleague of Professor Toby Thompson and I over in the supply chain. She's from Turkey, and she said that they still don't recognise, dyslexia as an issue in Turkey. So we live in a world where we're starting, I think, to scratch the surface. But how does it, if you're neurodivergent, how do you cope as a salesperson? What are the things that you are challenged by?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So we can look at this in two ways. So the kind of sales environment or being a sales professional can come with a number of challenges for certain people with neurodivergent conditions, and I'll come to some of those in a sec. But also there may be something particular about aspects of sales that actually suit certain types of neurodivergent brains as well. In terms of challenges, I think, for example, I have ADHD, and there does seem to be quite a few people with ADHD in sales positions. And with ADHD, we can often have challenges around things like time management, proactivity, organization, kind of following up on things and keeping track of things. And those are some particular challenges that can not only affect obviously how the person conducts their sales role, but can also affect their well-being and stress levels as well, if they're not able to get or create support with that. So those would be some of the challenges in terms of ADHD. And obviously with dyslexia, there may be challenges around how instructions are given or information is presented, things like that. But really we can look at what we can do to help and support, certainly as leaders, and educate people about how they can help themselves as well where it's appropriate.
Becci, I've got a question for you. If I jump in there, I'm a huge supporter of positive mental health in sales, and some of the things that you describe there, I think, well, that's not necessarily a bad thing that salespeople have these traits. They're high performers in some cases, but in many cases, I can't help but feel that those salespeople that are perhaps learning at a slower pace than others are then put under more stress and feel more pressure, and therefore it's affecting their mental health. So you mentioned about providing things for salespeople to help themselves, but what responsibility should the employer have on this?
Yeah, so I need to caveat this with kind of saying I'm not a HR expert, but we know that organisations do have a legal and I think moral obligation to support their neurodivergent employees to carry out their work in a safe and comfortable and accessible way. And Alex, the figures are horrific. Like I was looking at a study last week that said that 50% of neurodivergent people in the workplace currently believe they are at risk of an imminent burnout, and about 70% are having a current mental health challenge or an ongoing mental health challenge. And so I think certainly sales leaders, managers do have a responsibility, legal and moral, to take an honest kind of look at themselves and say, okay, is this something that I know enough about? Yes or no? Could I undertake some training, and could I learn what people need and how to have discussions with people about what they need, and the kind of tools and techniques and supports that I can put in place as a manager to help them. And I think it's worth saying that there is nothing that you could do to support a neurodivergent sales professional that wouldn't probably benefit other sales professionals as well.
It's really funny that you're saying that. Absolutely, because as I was listening to you speak, I was thinking, Andy, you are forever bringing up output from reports and surveys that have been done about how, this many people in sales are suffering from fear of burnout. This many people have got mental health challenges. This many people are feeling stressed. And I was thinking, we're talking about this, or the initial start of the conversation was that this is a uniquely neurodiverse challenge. And it isn't. This is actually everybody in sales. And maybe the key to unlocking how we make sales a better place for people is to look at how we need to support neurodiverse people and how we can roll that out across the entire sales world rather than just that particular pocket, because there will be learnings to be had, which I'm sure can be widely used here.
I'd love it if you could
Yeah.
share that insight you mentioned earlier, the 50% of salespeople suffering with stress, was it?
So they consider themselves at risk of an imminent burnout, and
Okay.
actually that is a really important thing to pick up on, because the thing is that you're right that everybody in a sales role, we all work in that busy, dynamic, ever-changing, ever-chasing the number kind of environment. We all work within that space, but some people have the deck stacked against them in terms of how they can cope. So this is about coping and then being able to thrive. And the thing is that if you don't have what you need as a neurodivergent sales professional to be able to cope and to be able to execute your sales role well, then you will put in more effort, more time, more bandwidth to try and keep up. And that is what leads to that increased risk of burnout.
Yeah, and this is what I think needs to be talked about more, so sales leaders can understand it and then start to do something about it. So if you can share that insight with me after the show, I'd love to share it in our LinkedIn group.
But
Absolutely, I'll pass that on.
I think what it's literally just hit me that when I started work, I was working in Barclays. It is now Barclays Asset Finance, long since gone. But Becci, one of the things you had to do is you would go out and find a customer, and you would basically sell to that customer the concept of them borrowing money against an asset that they wanted to buy. Call it a car, call it a printing press. There is a reason behind it, so just give me a little latitude. But once you'd done that, you had to go and sell the risk to your underwriters. So you had to come back into the bank and justify why that was a good loan. You clearly have to present the accounts and all of the other things. And you had to write a lending report. And there was 4 of us in the office. And if you were good enough, over time, the manager, who always had to countersign and had an authority up to a certain amount to approve before it went to an underwriter, you got your own limit. So you didn't have to go through the manager for 50,000 and below. And I remember he was my best man, really great guy. He got his underwriting limit of 50,000, and I was told I didn't write good enough reports. And it's only just hit me now. Is actually I didn't have any support. There was no such thing as spell checker or any of the other things that are available today.
Yeah.
And I can remember going home and crying. I said to my wife, "Why?" And it's only just hit me now that it took me until actually she sat me down and said, "This is how you write." And I still suffer from that today. I can't, I can talk, but I fear sticking anything down on paper because I just get all muddled up. And I find that really fascinating that we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
And if you talk about education today, which all people are, actually the scariest bit is GCSEs. There's no support for neurodiversity at GCSE level. We're fighting for one of our children to do that. But you come to university and post GCSE, A-level, degree, postgraduate, there's lots of support for them. It seems like universities like, here, just go, yeah, we get it. There's the speech recognition, there's all of these tools that help you. But that bit that gives you the gateway to anything is the hardest bit right now.
Well, I think we see this played out so often, don't we? You go to school as education as an example, and the first thing they should teach you is how to learn, and they don't. Like you should be taught how to sell, and you're told, Andy, just go out and sell something. Just go and chat. But we've got a really interesting comment here from Dr. Dale Childs. So he said, I wonder what are the key things that managers can do to help these salespeople manage this? What have you found to be most useful, Becci?
Yeah, so I can talk about the job role, and I can talk about the on-the-job learning as well, so that people have the same equity of opportunity in kind of progressing their career. So let's think about how we can support them in the role. First of all, well, obviously that's going to depend on their particular flavour of neurodivergence. And so what I would say is that obviously you can ask people if there's been a disclosure. It's okay to kind of ask people what they might need, and also to get help from HR or occupational health if you have that stuff in your organization to go to. But if it is around stuff to do with how do I execute like the practical stuff and the organizing stuff and the stuff that might not be as interesting and engaging as talking to the customer, then what I say to a lot of sales leaders is, when you're working with and coaching these people, it's not about training them on how to sell necessarily. In fact, they might be quite good at some aspects of influencing and selling already, but it's about helping people to access training or providing workplace adjustments that actually allow them to do the bits of the role that they find more stressful and challenging. So if we take Andy's case, today, if Andy, you were doing those underwriting reports, you'd have access to even free dictation stuff on your phone, like Otter, that could just transcribe things for you. There's a whole bunch of stuff, things like Asana and Pipedrive, various CRM or task management things that can not only help you to capture what you're supposed to be doing, but also flag up to you if you've got a deadline coming or if you've got an action to complete. So I do think, we've not even plumbed the depths of what, practical tools or AI can do. But at the same time, if somebody works best on a piece of paper because that's what they can see and understand, then the technology you need to encourage them to use is a piece of paper. So it really depends on them.
But Becci, it's this. I think there's this undervalued term that's used called psychological safety. Sales leaders talk about it, but do they actually provide that so that salespeople can feel safe enough to say, do you know what? I'm really struggling with this report. I'm really struggling with writing this RFP, this 50-page, RFP, request for proposal. So what, and I know Andy's talked about this before in previous episodes, but what is psychological safety, and how would a leader, a business go about creating that for their salespeople?
Yeah, so psychological safety, really, just broadly put, is kind of setting up the organizational culture and the individual interactions that you have with your sales professionals, so that they feel that they are able to disclose things or discuss things, say, to do with their neurodivergence and their needs. And of course, we can imagine that, high trust would be a crucial component in helping that to happen. But in terms of like practical things, there's two ingredients that I think is super important. One is disclosure from leadership, as long as it's safe and comfortable to do so. So I encounter sales leaders who are in their 50s and 60s who know they are dyslexic or know they have ADHD, but they're frightened to say, they haven't told anybody. However, if I was 23 and just come into sales and I'm struggling, if I saw my big boss that I admire being open about their struggles and challenges and strengths, that would encourage me to do the same. So that is one thing. But the other one, I think, is having a coaching culture, having a culture where it is normal and expected for people to take time away from the kind of busy humdrum of the sales environment to actually reflect on what their goals and desires are in their role and what they need to be able to get there. So I think those two things are really helpful in promoting that psychological safety and getting the topic out there in the open for people to feel like it's normal to talk about.
This is a question for everyone. I'd love to get Andy and Adam's thoughts, but do you think it's okay for the sales leader that is cracking the whip from a forecasting perspective to also be the coach?
It's a great question, actually. How do you do? And I just want to add, but give Becci some time to answer that. A great friend of mine, I really admire him, Paul Devlin. He's now a company. He did something in a previous organization, very big technology company, where he said to his leaders and managers, no one gets a bonus unless everybody hits 100%. and actually to achieve that, your mechanism is coaching.
Yeah.
And what he found is,
So my bonus
Yeah.
is absolutely reliant on you achieving your number,
Yeah.
not just me. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a fantastic way to build a team, isn't it?
But what he found is it takes 6 coaching interventions for you to believe that it's not going to come around about the number. So this is not a forecast inspection. It's not a deal inspection. It's about you, Adam. And so actually, you're going to be looking at me 6 times, 6 months, and you're going to, at some point, Andy, you're going to go back to normal and go, well, where's the deal? Now, he managed to change that, and the individual stuck on the journey. But Becci, I'd love now to hear your answer. Now I've given you a little bit of breathing space to think about that, because it's a bit of a sticky conversation, that one.
Yeah. So there's 2 things I'd like to say. I think interesting to just throw in about that kind of way of structuring the incentives. That could be really motivating for some people, but it could be terrifying for neurodivergent people who perhaps would worry that they would not be able to keep up and they might let their team members down. And so when we're thinking about incentivization, it can be worth looking at, is this going to lead to, increased stress or burnout for anybody in the team due to their ability to kind of deliver on that. But in terms of what was the other thing that we were talking about before then? Sorry.
Coaches, and whether the manager can actually coach, or should they be doing the same thing?
Yeah, so it's perfectly possible, and indeed can be highly effective for a manager to take a coaching approach to dealing with the numbers, the forecast, the pipeline, things like that. But I think what's really important is contracting and signposting, and that can look like saying, here's what this conversation is about, and here's what hat I'm wearing today with you. And then, at different times saying, okay, today it's training, or today it's mentoring. So kind of being really explicit about what you're talking about and what kind of hat you're wearing. That deals with any ethical issues around that, cracking the whip and coaching. But also it makes it very clear to a range of brains what's happening and why, so that they can understand and engage with it safely, have that psychological safety. So it can be done, but just signpost what's going on and why.
So I think let's be slightly controversial. It appears it appears a bit hard. So if I'm a sales leader, it's a lot easier to try and skew my interviewing to people who aren't dyslexic, aren't neurodivergent, and go for the standard superstar. Why is that a bad decision? Because I think it is, but why is that a bad decision?
So are you saying, Andy, like as the coach, it's easier to just, pick your top performer, or pick someone who's coachable, or pick someone who doesn't have any, neurodivergent challenges, maybe go for the low hanging fruit?
In the interview processes, we've all talked about the bias, etc., of inclusivity, and there's bias around gender and origination and all of these things. And I have my view, which I'll come on to in a minute, from some early work we did very, very early in the institution. But it's probably, isn't it just easier to kind of screen these people out in the interview process and not have them in your sales force, and just not have the problem?
Well, before you answer that, Becci, I would like to say that every time I come on a video podcast, whichever one it is, and we're having this conversation, I have, like you said, it's just dawned on me now why this was. Every time I find exactly that. I find that aha moment going on. And I think what's really interesting for me, Becci, is that when you introduced this, you said about neurodiversity, a whole range of brains from one extreme to the other. And I think that a lot of people, to use the words that you used, Andy, it's like, okay, so we've got like this, we're going to go after this kind of, and I'm going to screen my interviewing process in order that I get just this kind of person, or my coaching techniques for just this kind of person. And actually the reality is that neurodiversity is far more obvious to people now, because it is being diagnosed and being identified in all of its different forms. And we realize that, is that the minority, or is everybody, did they all have a level of neurodiversity? And therefore, these lessons about how you were at the cutting edge of this and how you are creating safe spaces and support and methodologies and tricks and tips that people can use to overcome their own personal challenges. This is crucial for empowering not just neurodiverse people, not just salespeople, but everybody in the workplace and everybody in the human race, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think to respond quickly to your point before we talk about kind of interviews and recruitment, Adam, I think I agree with you. But what it's really important to stress is while there would be probably benefits for everybody, and I think there's a lot of useful stuff that would make the kind of sales workplace better for all. The key point not to lose is that the neurodivergent employees must have those things. It's not a nice to have, and so you would be failing on that legal and moral requirement if those things weren't there. To come to the interviewing stuff, obviously I know you were being controversial, Andy, but obviously it would be illegal to screen people out on the basis of their brain in almost all cases, and actually there's been some really big employment tribunals recently where psychometric testing or particular types of interview have been found to be discriminatory against people, and that led to big payouts.
I always hated them.
Oh, go on.
I always hated them, Becci, those psychometric tests.
Yeah, it can really, you run the risk of actually screening somebody out as well who could have fantastic strengths and unique perspectives to bring to the role. But one thing we can do that meets that requirement of helping the people who have to have it, but also benefiting others, sounds controversial, but just send your interview questions out in advance. Let everybody see them, because you get a better quality of answer from everybody, but then you're not discriminating against your neurodivergent employees who need time to process or need time to know what is going to happen in the interview. But yeah, you really do run the risk of screening out some great contributions as well.
Becci, sorry, go on, Andy.
Sorry, thanks, Alex. What I was actually going to do was actually offer the reason I was kind of being kind of controversial is at the very incept of what is now the ISP, we actually created a study with a global top 4 consultancy to actually measure the impact of inclusivity and diversity. And I think, I will say, I don't like diversity and inclusivity. I think the world's got it the wrong way around. You have to be inclusive before you can be diverse.
Agree.
But back to that point, actually, inclusive and diverse teams by ethnic origin, gender, orientation, and mental capability were proved at that point some 9 years ago to be 7% more profitable than those teams that weren't. So it's not only avoiding the illegal elements of this process, it's actually the actual argument is it's bloody common sense.
It's good for business.
It's business sense. And if it's so prevalent in society, don't we want to have those inclusive and diverse teams that are going to meet the same kind of things on the buying side? And because it's a human science, why are we thinking that it's not representative of society? So the reason I actually asked that question is I think everybody should be exploring this, and I think it answers one of the issues, which is if we're short of salespeople, we're short of talented salespeople. That's the argument. There might be less open vacancies. I don't know if you saw the figures this morning or heard the figures on the BBC, so kind of trusted source. There is actually currently today just short of 998,000 vacancies in the UK. And this is the first time that wages have increased more than inflation. So you're starting to see things change in the labour market. And there was 43,000 vacancies filled in the last 3 months. So there's still a lot of vacancies out there. And it might well be that people are saying, I will release, rightly or wrongly, my underperformers, and I'll pause on investment in some of those roles. However, we see that older salespeople are retiring, going for fractional jobs, consultancy jobs, moving away. we see younger people not wanting to come into it more. Surely we should be actually opening the doors and saying, let's be very, very inclusive and diverse. And that is all ranges of diversity, because that's going to make great business sense, and it's going to represent society, and it's going to give us a different type of culture that people can feel psychologically brilliantly safe in.
But also within the sales environment, it's all about the bottom line. 7%. A 7% competitive advantage by behaving this way. Because not only is it morally right, not only is it legally right, it's also, from a business perspective, the right thing to do by your shareholders. I mean, it should be a no-brainer, shouldn't it?
Yeah, but Adam, how many sales leaders really think about neurodivergence when they're thinking about inclusion and diversity? I don't think many do. I might be wrong.
Well, I think Becci, I'm answering your question here, I think Becci covered it a little bit earlier, which is actually, it's back to the psychological safety of the leader. And leaders don't feel psychologically safe to be vulnerable. And consequently, they then can't actually go to their organizations and say, there's a different way of doing things here. I don't feel safe suggesting it. I'm going to get shot down. People are going, I don't care about that, Adam, just get on with the number. It's not for you to think about these things. It's just for you to get to think about the number.
Yeah.
And there's a really good friend of mine called Chris Payton. He's an ex-lieutenant, well, he's a retired lieutenant colonel, and he helps boards now tackle some of these really, really interesting issues. But what he looks at is actually the military have become, in leadership, hugely vulnerable, which you wouldn't expect of military people in the armed forces. You'd expect to charge that hill, we're done, it's all about male machoism. And he said, no, it doesn't work anymore. Actually, you've got to realize your own, as a general, if you're going to get a division to follow you, you've got to be authentic, you've got to be real, you've got to remain your own fellows. And I said, well, surely that works in corporate world. Yeah? Surely that works in the sales world. He went, no. He said, because there's still that perception of, I'm paid the big bucks to know all the answers. Therefore, I've got to know all the answers. Regardless of what question it is, I've got the answer. And it's that back to psychological safety of the leader, being vulnerable as a leader and being authentic, and then it will flow down.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So we've got some questions that we prepped for you, actually, Becci, and a couple of these are just I would love to know. How can neurodivergent people support themselves? I'm neurodivergent. I've gone into a role. What should I be doing in terms of support, or what help should I be asking for from the team, the leadership, the organization, in order that I can be my best self and I can feel that I'm really a contributor to the team?
Yeah, so let's carve this up by people who kind of know some stuff already and people who don't. So what often happens, particularly with women as well, so let's think about the role of women in sales. Like myself, I was only diagnosed as ADHD and autistic in my late 30s, and I didn't actually know what would help me. And so if you find yourself in that position, if you're newly diagnosed and it's at a later time in life, then actually you could do things like approach HR, you could talk to occupational health, and there's also the government's Access to Work scheme where you can get an assessment. You don't even need a formal diagnosis actually, but you can get an assessment to find out what some of your needs are, and they will pay along with your employer, depending on the size of the organization. They will pay for things like coaching or devices or software that can help you. So that's a place to start if you really don't know. But are there some tools I could give you? Well, let's think about that overwhelm and that burnout. So I would urge you to look for practical tools that meet challenges. So if you need to find dictation software or diaries and alarms that you're actually going to understand and pay attention to, experiment with what is out there and find that software or use that AI that is going to help you. But that's practical stuff. That doesn't help you manage this. It doesn't help you manage yourself. And so looking after your mental health, looking after your general well-being is going to be so important. And that might be talking about things in coaching or seeking external mental health support if you need it. But it's also about keeping kind of calm in the workplace and keeping some work-life balance as well. So it might be, popping a few more breaks in the schedule, getting outside, doing coaching with your manager outside or in a different place. Anything that puts that kind of pause in where your body and your mind can just chill out for a few minutes and step away from the craziness. All of that can help you to support yourself for sure.
Well, we've had some, sorry, Alex, we've had some fantastic comments of support for this, and everyone in the audience seems to be loving this. Thank you so much. We really needed to have this conversation. I've got a really interesting comment here from Andrew Slesser. If leaders do not think that being inclusive and diverse with their work, being inclusive and diverse with the pool of selection of the next generation workforce will be dramatically reduced, which obviously is it's common sense, really, isn't it? But from LinkedIn user, and I can't see who this is because of how their security settings are, they've said the following. It has been reported that adults with ADHD are around 60% more likely to be fired, 30% more likely to have ongoing chronic employment issues, and 3 times more likely to quit on impulse. I mean, that's truly shocking, isn't it?
I find that astonishing. And I think, the question you asked Becci earlier, Adam, what tools are available to people that are neurodivergent to help them? But what about those people that don't yet know?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because in reality, again, the aha moment. Somewhat you've just read out. You know me. I'm an impulse guy.
Yeah.
And occasionally, I will go, right. That's it. I'm off. I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's actually, again, in this conversation, it's like a therapy session with all these people. I'll go cry in a minute and have a hug. But that is true. I mean, I'm really laying myself out in terms of, I recognise that in me. If it gets really bloody hard, even in some of the roles I volunteer in, it's like, everything gets thrown in the air and it's that blip. Then about an hour and a half later on reflection, I'll go, well, maybe I overreacted a bit there and it doesn't help. It's... And therefore, you need to know around this thing. If you're a leader and you see a salesperson do that, how do you give them some tolerance to go, let's go and have a coffee and chat and walk outside and walk and talk, and then let's reassess as to it's probably not a decision you want to take and we can help you more.
Well, I think it's really interesting that for me, this is an education issue. We each pick up little snippets of what neurodiversity is, like all of the other things that we come into in the workplace. And we jump to all sorts of conclusions from the little snippets that we've picked up. And I want to come back again to the very first thing that you said, Becci, which was neurodiversity is a range. And that's the point. The point is that there are people that have complex needs as a result of that, and they find things a real challenge, and they obviously need supporting. But we can all see elements of ourselves in all of these behaviors normally. And I think that recognizing that it's not a problem that you have, although you may have that problem more than me. I use the word problem in inverted commas. This is something that we all have. The stress in sales is not something which is unique. It may be exacerbated by having neurodiversity and overwhelm and burnout. But these are global lessons, and we see that in your comment about the performance of organizations. A diverse workforce in all of its different aspects, 7% higher performing. I mean, this is obvious, isn't it?
It's really interesting because Toby, who runs the Grenfell studios here, centres on executive development. It'd be really good to get him on actually and talk about what trends he sees, particularly in sales organizations. Because again, another ha-ha moment, a sales leader will go, well, I'll try and find something for my sales managers to develop on and courses and training for them to go on. And we all know that there's the avalanche downhill to sales people get X amount of training to fix normally a corporate problem. But actually, how many senior C-suite leaders go, where's my development? Where do I go off to and enhance and develop my skills? Because I managed before the pandemic and I thought I knew what the world was. Now I've been through this pandemic and whatnot. And I think that answer, I'd love to get Toby's insights on that. And I think that answer is probably down towards 0. I get emerging people will go through MBAs and do various things like that. But actually, when does the C-suite person go away? and go, I want to talk to other C-suites and figure out, they might have a coach themselves, but actually when's their space to go and look inside, creating psychological safety?
So
Yeah.
we've had another great comment from Jess Flack here, which is, don't forget that there are neurodivergent superpowers, ways of working that are incredibly impactful. And I think, again, you know, nowadays in the modern world, the leaders need to be able to identify those superpowers and promote them and embrace those, rather than trying to force people into a box. You know, that's just the way it is. And you're absolutely right. You know, it is about learning these new techniques of managing and getting the best from people.
Oh yeah, I mean, Becky, you know, give you 2 seconds to thought, but I was told that I scared the living bejesus out of most people, because they went, because your brain works in such a way, you see things and the connections of what is possible far quicker than anybody else does. So everybody else sits in the room and goes, "Where's he going? What's he just said?" And I've got no idea how we're going to get there. Becky, what are your thoughts around that? The superpowers and
Yeah, so the superpowers kind of framing of stuff is an interesting one. And I think in terms of the psychological safety, and in terms of kind of people feeling comfortable to talk about their own neurodivergency, it's important to consider that some neurodivergent people feel very strongly that they have some enhanced abilities, but some people actually are quite turned off by the superpower kind of narrative. And some people will even say, I might be autistic, but I actually don't have any special powers, quote unquote. I can't, you know, count cards in a casino or anything like that. And they find that unhelpful and find it something they can't live up to or don't identify with.
Right.
But it is certainly fair to say, that there are some unique strengths that or perspectives that may be associated with neurodivergence. And I think we do see that in sales. You know, if you think about what selling is, it's about building a relationship with someone, helping them collaboratively to solve their problems, coming up with those ideas like you described, Andy, in the moment that nobody else is going to offer. Surely, if you could recruit someone who could deliver that all the time or most of the time without burning out, obviously, then you would want that. And so I think as long as it's a helpful way of framing it for those people in your team that are neurodivergent, then certainly there are really unique strengths that these people can bring to sales, and probably is what attracts them to sales in the first place. So we need to keep them. Yeah.
it's a really good point.
Before the show, Becky, we spoke, and you know, I used the term, I think, the spectrum, and you quite quickly corrected me that there is no, don't think of this as being somewhere on a spectrum. Think about, you know, it more in a black and white sense. You either are or you aren't. But what advice can you give sales leaders that perhaps need to get a view of where their sales people sit, and then how they should react or support them effectively?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it speaks to that question you had earlier about what if you don't know, or what if nobody knows that you're neurodivergent. So I do think it's important to stay within our lane, from a kind of HR perspective, as well as from a personal comfort perspective, and so, you know, we can't, you know, whether it's as a sales leader or a sales coach, we can't go around diagnosing people. We're not clinicians, and we are not, you know, we are not educational psychologists, and so I do think it's important about using other channels or support. So, you know, again, HR, occupational health, also maybe doing a kind of mental health first aid course, and obviously as part of mental health first aid training, one of the things you learn is to kind of refer people to internal and external supports. And if somebody is struggling as a result of their neurodivergence, one of the first indicators that they or anybody else may notice, this is what happened to me, it's how I got diagnosed, is they will experience a burnout or some form of really poor mental health, like depression or anxiety. And so even if you don't know, or they don't know, whether that has been triggered by unmet needs from neurodivergence, you would still advise them to, see occupational health and go to the GP. And so just taking that general caring approach and referring on to other supports is what you would do. And then with luck, because things are improving, but with luck, somebody will eventually say to them, and this needs to happen more often, but someone will eventually say, have you considered that you might be autistic, or have you considered that you might have ADHD? Let's look at that. And then somebody else will carry that for you to make it easier on you. Yeah.
Becci, we're unfortunately at time. I think we could go another hour on this.
I was just thinking what a thrilling show this has been.
Yeah,
Absolutely
great.
fantastic.
So, Becci, thank you so much for coming on.
You're so welcome.
Brilliant. Alex, thank you.
You're welcome.
Adam, it's been great to be on the sofa. Your sofa duck has now been broken.
Indeed it has. Thank you.
Thank you to Chris, Toby, David, and the entire team here. We are learning. We hope you love the style of what's going on here. Please give us your thoughts about what you want to see going forward from SalesTV. So thank you to Cranfield again for hosting us and the Grenfell Turner Studios. And we wish you, wherever you are, a great end to your day, start to your day, or halfway through your day. Thanks for watching.
Have a great day. Thanks for